Hi, I'm Kelly Barnett from the Newhouse Career Development Center, and I'm going to talk about all things resumes. In this course, you're going to be designing a resume. It will be beautiful, it will have great branding, but we also want it to be really functional. The great news is the things I'm going to tell you about today will serve you well whether you're a first-year student, a grad student, or somebody who's been out in the industry working for a number of years. Our best practices across all those levels of experience are pretty consistent, so this is information you'll be using from here on out. Let's jump into things. Okay, so here we have a resume. It says Sophia Lee at the top. You might be wondering, who is Sophia Lee? She's pretend. We made her up just so we could show you what a resume should look like. But you'll notice we see her name very easily at the top of the page. That's fantastic. We need to know whose resume we're looking at immediately. The word mark that you create for this class will be fantastic in helping to brand you, and that's a really good thing. That's a good use of space. When it comes to your name, you don't have to use your legal name. If you go by a nickname or something else than what might appear on your birth certificate or a passport or something like that, that's fine. This is not a legally binding document, but what you do want to do is make sure that you're being consistent. The name that's on your resume should be the name that is on your LinkedIn profile, should be the name that's on your portfolio website. So be consistent there. As a rule, people want to know what to call you, what you like to be called, so use that on your resume. At the top there, you'll also see contact information. Having a physical mailing address is a good thing. It shows that you have housing. Right now, we might be doing things more remotely, but in the future, when you're applying to things, you want to use the address that's going to be most relevant to the thing you're applying to. So if it were here in Syracuse, using your campus address. If it was back home, using that address. If you have a friend or a family member who lives in a city where you're applying to things and you know you could crash on their couch, you could even put their address. Sometimes companies look at local candidates first, and again, it shows you have housing. That's an appealing thing to an employer. Next, you'll see your cell phone number and then an email address. You probably have more than one email address, so pick a professional one. Professional is usually your name, maybe some numbers if necessary in there. Your SYR email address would work here, but sometimes people prefer a Gmail, something like that. That's also appropriate. So looking at this resume overall, you'll see there's 4 sections. 3 of those you must have: experience, skills, and education. And we'll go one by one through what each section needs to have, but that activity section is optional. You do not need to have it. Our industry dictates that we have these 3 sections though, so make sure that you have those on your resume. So let's start with that first one, the experience section. If we zoom in here, you'll see that the experience section is very tidily laid out. Each experience is its own little chunk, and they all have the same criteria in that header line. They all have a title, an organization, a location, and a date. You need to have the title, the organization, and the date. Locations are optional. It's nice if you can fit that in there. If not, don't worry about it. You should always lead with either the title or the organization. You need to use the same formatting throughout, but it's up to you which one you list first. I would look at your organizations and your titles and say which one is more attractive to future employers or which one shows a certain skill set, and lead with that. This person has a very concise resume in that they've put all of this header line information on one line. If you're trying to fill the page, you might have your title over the company, and then the right side of the page have the date over the location, and then go into your descriptions. That would use up an extra line per experience. Also, bulleting formatting will change the amount of space that you take up. This again, very concise. It's a running bullet. They're only using that little bullet as a bold point for people to skim through between phrases, and it looks nice and tidy because there's a space on either side of each of those bullets. However, if you have space to fill, don't use running bullets. Use those vertically aligned bullets. Those are the easiest to skim, and that's usually where we recommend everybody starts. But at some point, you need to kind of compress things to fit more things on the page. You need to have a 1-page resume until you have about 10 years of experience. So that's going to require that you kind of finagle stuff a little bit as you go through your time here and into your career. Looking at descriptions of experiences, if we start with that first one, account management intern, excellent. Sometimes students will just write intern for their title. Don't do that. Always put a descriptor in front of it. That helps with making your page skim friendly. That's what a resume has to be. No one's really going to read every single word except for us. For you, the student who's writing it, and me, somebody who might be reviewing it. But an HR recruiter or somebody at a company, they're really going to skim through. So if you write account management intern, that tells me a lot in one glance. Looking at the descriptions underneath, each of these phrases, and they're phrases, not sentences, so we don't put periods at the end, each of these phrases starts with a verb. If it's something that you're still doing, you might have some mixed tense, like this first experience. Shadowed, that's done, that's in the past tense. However, conduct, brainstorm, those are present tense. If it's an experience that's still going on, you might have a mixed bag like that. However, things that are completely done in the past, everything should be in past tense. So internships are an obvious fit for experience, so are jobs. But what might not be really obvious is using coursework as experience. Look at that second entry there. You can use coursework as experience when you're helping to fill in a hole. What I mean by that is when you think about the skills that you possess, and then the skills that your resume is showing, is there a gap there? Do you have a skill that your resume is not showing that you possess? If that answer is yes, then you probably want to think, hey, do I have a course that can help me show that? So this person is using a media planning course, fantastic. If this person goes on and they have an internship where they're doing media planning work, that internship is going to kind of check that skill set box for them. And so they can take this course off at that point when they put that internship on. However, in the meantime, it's a great way to show, hey, look, I've done this experience. Hands-on experience is the single most important factor in hiring. So it's really important that you do that kind of self-inventory to make sure that you're showing off all the great things that you can do. And it's also why experience is our first section. This is a weird thing for the communications industry. We put this thing first. Other industries, for the most part, start with education. But you do want to lead with experience. Trust me on that. Other types of experience, we're very flexible in terms of what we consider as experience as an industry. So internships and jobs, pretty obvious. We talked about coursework. You also might have on-campus work. You might have volunteer work. You might have something that's your own endeavor. Do you have a lawn care company? Do you write a blog? Do you do graphic design work on the side? Any of those things could be experience. You put them in the experience section. It's totally appropriate. It shows the different skill sets that you have. One way to make sure that your experiences are really robustly described is to make sure that you're including numbers when you can. So did you write 2 articles? Did you manage a team of 7? Or results? So did you increase follower count by 20%? And then also frequency. Did you write those 2 articles weekly, monthly, twice a semester? That really makes a big difference. It's really the difference between wrote articles and wrote 2 articles weekly. The latter gives a lot more information about how familiar you are with a type of responsibility, and it just shows that you have a lot of experience doing it. Don't be afraid if you've done a lot of different internships, but maybe you've had a lot of similar responsibilities. It's okay to be a little bit repetitive. It shows that you're really good at that one thing. So don't just leave it off because you feel like you've already said it. You also want to give context to skills in your experience section. We're going to talk about your skills section next. That's really like a quick reference. For example, I might say designed flyers for annual fundraiser. What would be better is if I said designed flyers using Adobe InDesign for annual fundraiser. It's giving context to that Adobe InDesign skill that I'm going to be listing below. It shows that, look, I've actually applied that somewhere. So that's a good thing to do too. Anytime you have an opportunity to cite one of those skills from your skill section, make sure you're doing that within your experience section. I do also want to note the importance of relevance when it comes to experience. So usually when you think about listing experiences on a resume, you think about how you go backwards in time as you read down the page. That's a pretty traditional format, so the most recent thing is at the top of the page. However, with communications, relevance is very important. What you'd want to do is look at your experience before you apply to anything and say, for this thing that I'm applying to, what is the most relevant thing on my resume? Maybe it's that digital sales manager. That's on-campus experience, but that's the thing that's most related to what you're applying to. Bump that up to the top of that section. So you'd have the DO experience over XYZ agency over the business course. The DO would lead the pack there because it's the most relevant. Would that take your dates out of chronological order? Yeah, it would, but that's okay. Dates are less important. They're there if we need them. They're over there. But really what's most important is what you did. So if somebody's looking for a candidate, they're skimming this page, they're hit over the head with how great of a candidate you are because they're going to pay the most attention to the things at the top of that experience section. So you want to make sure you bump up things that are more relevant. You also want to do the same thing with any bullets within each experience. Look at the things that you did. What is the most relevant thing to talk about first? So just do that little assessment before you apply to anything. So that really sums up experience. Let's move on to that skills section. Unlike your experience section where I said, you have to start with a verb and you want to look at your tenses and you want to give me numbers, skills is very straightforward. Basically, you're grouping things by skill, listing them with commas, and that's it. You don't need to say that you're proficient in or familiar with something because by listing it on your resume, that's the assumption. Basically, the way to gauge things is if there's a skill set that you possess and somebody gave you a project centering on that skill set, would you be okay with that? Would you be able to handle that project? If the answer is yes, you have a good working knowledge, you could put that on your resume. So because of this, you're not going to write proficient in, familiar with any of those types of qualifying details. You just group them by type of skill. So for Sophia Lee here, we've got a database bullet, we've got a writing and language bullet, we've got a computer program bullet, and then we've got social media. Looking at all of these, you'll see that I'm not labeling them like databases, languages. Don't need to do that. It's intuitive when you're skimming through the section. You also will notice though with language, we are qualifying it. That's kind of the one exception. Are you conversational? Are you fluent? Those are good little indicators to give. And then my last note for skills is yes, list social media. Don't just write those two words, social media, but list out the specific platforms that you're familiar with. List them all. WordPress, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever the latest thing is, TikTok, put them all on there. It's a hot skill set. Companies are looking for that. In the future, that might change, but for right now, we would say definitely include those. And similarly, give context to those above in experience if that's relevant. So that's it for your skills section. Let's look at education, the last of the 3 required sections. This one does go backwards in time as you kind of go down. So you're going to have your most recent degree or your degree in progress at the top. And for that master's degree that's listed there, a few things to note. The 5 things listed there, the college, the university, the degree, the program, the date, that's the bare minimum. For any degree that you list, you need to have those things. You can have other things, but before I move on and talk about those for the undergrad, I want to point out the Newhouse name. Everybody's very particular, especially alumni, about how you write the Newhouse name. We do call ourselves the Newhouse School because the school name as a whole, kind of a mouthful. But on an official document like this, make sure you're writing it out. So, little nuances here. S.I. There are 2 periods, but there is no space after the first period. It is smushed together. So SI Newhouse School of Public, don't forget that word. Communications, don't forget that it's plural. Those are the most common mistakes that I see. Make sure you get those right. So we have that master's degree. You'll notice it's not a master's of science, it's a master of science or a master of arts. Different programs with a Newhouse will either have the of science or of arts. No one's ever going to not hire you because you got one over the other, but it is important to get it right just for the sake of details. Below, this person for undergrad has 2 different colleges listed because they had 2 different majors. Great. They also have some extra information like a GPA, Dean's List, scholarships. That's all optional. You'll notice the scholarships there could go under like an honors or an award section, but that's one of those optional sections. You don't have to have it. For the sake of space, it might be just more convenient to list it under education because it's academically based. So education is pretty straightforward as well. Below education, you'll see activities. That is an optional section. And I always kind of throw up a red flag whenever I see an activity section because a lot of times people undersell. If you have something that you're involved in and you would consider it to be an activity, don't just put it under activities. What you want to do is stop and ask yourself, because this industry is very accepting of different ways you can get experience. Is this something that I'm involved in that I can really elaborate on and talk about the things that I've done or created or led or learned? If the answer is yes, you probably want to move that up to your experience section. List it as an experience. If it's something that's more passive, you're involved in a professional organization and people come in and they speak to you and it's really helpful, but you have more of a passive role, that is something I would put in activities, okay? So don't sell yourself short. So of the 3 required sections that you have to have, you want to make sure that you're not combining those. Experience, skills, education all have to stand on their own, but any optional additional stuff that you want to put on there, activities, awards, honors, you could combine those if you need the space on the page. So you could have activities and awards, and you could list Ski Club, and you could list your scholarship. And it would make sense, and it wouldn't confuse anybody because you've labeled it correctly. Okay, so let's say you've finished your resume or you've done your best with this. What can you do to get some feedback? Well, I hope that you try to make these changes because you're just going to get the same feedback if you don't make those changes. So try to incorporate them, make note of any questions that you have. And then what you can do is you can email us at nhcdc@syr.edu and say that, hey, I'd love to get some feedback on my resume. Tell us the questions you have. We'll take a look at that for you. All of us in the CDC take turns with the content that comes in through that inbox for review. And so one of us will review it. We're usually pretty quick. It depends if there's a deluge. It might take us a little bit longer, but it usually definitely tends to be within a couple business days. So we'll email you back with our review of that. And if you want to resubmit, you can do that again. There's no limit on how many times you can submit your materials for review. We also can set up an appointment. During the summer, you can email that same email address, nhcdc@syr.edu, and we can set up an appointment, set up a time to talk. We also have drop-in hours that you will get emails about. And during the academic year, you'll also be able to set up appointments via Handshake. But more information to come on that. I hope this was helpful. We really look forward to working with you and seeing those resumes soon.